to say a very good morning in the frozen north to Mr. Neil Oliver. Neil, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. It's always good to see your cheerful face.
Yes. My father had a word for it, which I'm not going to use on the radio because it's probably too Scottish to be understood. But the frozen north is probably right. I mean, I was watching a friend of mine who lives in North London, where they still had some snow yesterday. I mean, has the snow brought you things which are good, or has it made it worse?
I am my eldest boy is the same. He's 15. We're both we like the winter actually. I love it. I love going out when there's snow on the ground and frost on the ground, and I like it when the sky is blue and the air is cold in my lungs. I find that it reminds me of being a child again and wanting to break into a sprint and run up a hill or climb. I feel it quite energizing. So I suppose, fortunately, given the timing of all of this, I find this quite good. And I think even when the weather is bleak, even when it's freezing rain or whatever, and you're out in the early morning dealing with things, I find it makes me think about other people who've suffered so much more in other times. You're talking about Holocaust Memorial Day, and I've read quite a lot over the years about all of the horrors of the 20th century, out of interest in trying to comprehend why all of that happened. But I always find when I'm out, if I feel sorry for myself when I'm out in the cold, basically, it always makes me think of other people who had it 1,000 times worse, just beyond the reach of living memory. So, I always find it a time of year that puts things in context for me, and rather than just feeling sorry for myself.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's easy though to feel sorry for yourself because you wrote this week about communication with people and the seeing of people. And I mean, I went to actually a theatre, would you believe, the other day, because a friend of mine's a producer and he's worked a new way of actually making things happen, and he's basically shooting a musical of The Great Gatsby, which is going to be put out as a live stream, and he invited me to come and review it effectively, which meant that I was allowed to go there. Theatre was empty, had a crew of I don't know, 10 people, but had people dressed up, singing, dancing. I can't tell you how uplifting it was just to be there.
Yeah. Over the last couple of years, I did a sort of a one-man show, I think we'd call it. I was touring a book, and I did a 2-hour recounting of a book, and I found it every single night terrifying, being having an audience of 500, 600, 700 people.
Yeah.
But the energy, and people talk. I'd heard comedians and other people, performers and whatever, talk about audiences and didn't know really what they were talking about. But when I found out I had an audience of my own, it's like plugging into a battery, a great big battery of human energy, and it's great for everyone. You can feel energy in a room in a theatre, and obviously, sadly at the moment we're just not able to gather as audiences. But please bring back the time when we can, because the power of theatres, those venues, for thousands of years, we've known about it since ancient Greece that. Yeah. People come together in those ways. They re-energize one another.
Yeah, and also just watching talented people doing things on a stage. You're kind of also reminded that there are joyous things out there.
Yeah, it's this isolation that's so hard, that's so incredibly draining and enervating for people. And I think because we mostly have had the chance to be together for most of our lives with those we wish to be with. You absolutely take it for granted, and now the forced isolation that we've all been going through, you're brought face to face with how damaging that is in every conceivable way. And yes, to find ways in which we can make contact with one another again, properly make contact with one another, because the toll that has been taken on people. And you're right. I mean, your friend there finding another way to communicate something uplifting and whatever, and something to stimulate people. It's great, but it doesn't really compensate for the inability that we have at the moment to come together in large groups. And people do that because they need to do that.
They do, because it is the human condition. And we spoke about your son last week, about how he was feeling and how my kids are feeling and how everybody's children are feeling. I think people are beginning to understand now, even at levels of government and at levels of politics, that this kind of homeschooling isn't the answer. It's not working. Many parents have given up on it. Lots of kids have given up on it. And I think with luck and with some pressure from people like ourselves, they will realise that the schools just have to reopen, because you can't go on like this.
Yeah, I do hope so. Yes, we've talked about the physical toll that we can see it taking on our own children, and I hear from hundreds of people every week, from by one means or another, people saying the same. I mean, I've lain in bed and speculated whether the government might not be obliged to almost write the year off educationally, and almost offer the population coming through an extra year of school. You know, heavens, as taxpayers, we pay for it, and our children are entitled to it. I've wondered, literally to that extent. I thought maybe we should do another year for them if we're serious about letting them catch up. But in the short term, at the moment, with every day that passes with this going on, I'm absolutely seeing it in my own, and I'm hearing it from everybody else. We're finding, actually, we're making a great deal of getting the kids out physically, especially our youngest, getting them out, walking about, and he meets up with a friend, and they go out, because God, they're ashen faced at the moment, way faced children with dark circles under their eyes. They emerge from their bedrooms, where they're online doing all this on-screen learning, which is all very well, and the schools are making whatever efforts they can. But heavens, the kids look rough, just physically drained by it, and we keep dragging them out into the snow and the frost to try and get some colour back into them.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Because, I mean, it's the old adage, isn't it? If you've ever been unemployed and you don't have any reason to get up in the morning, or being a student, in other words, as well, a lot of you just, after a while, you just don't want to do anything. You can't be bothered.
Yeah. In all seriousness, we can't, I think, as a society, overlook the toll that's being taken, and the necessity to get people moving again. At the simplest level, there's a profoundly moving sequence in Primo Levi's "If This Is a Man." In one of the camps, he talks about very early on encountering an older man who's getting washed at the sink, and the water's foul and it's cold and there's no way to get dried apart from using his clothes. And Primo Levi says to him, "Why do you even bother?" And the older man says, "You've got to maintain the scaffolding.
Yes.
You have to maintain the skeleton of who you are." Now, I'm not making comparisons between the two. I merely use that to illustrate the point that it's so easy at the moment to think, "Oh, I'll just stay in my pajamas." Or I won't even get out of bed because there's nothing to get out of bed for. And it's impossible to overstate the importance of galvanizing people into getting back into routines that are physical. We need the physical, and it's all well and good that you can get everything delivered. You can get all your food delivered. You can get takeaway food delivered. You don't need to talk to another living soul. You can just watch box sets or something, or whatever. But you need the physical structure to the day, because you need, as functioning human beings, you need to get up at the same time every day, have a routine, do things. And it's maybe it sounds ridiculous to be saying that, but I don't think so. I think it's vitally important to get people moving, and for want of access to loved ones and crowds and the proper socializing that we all want to do. Because otherwise you're going to see the dissolution of society. It does start to come apart, and you can't say, "Oh well, it's only been this amount of time. We don't need to worry about it yet."
Yeah. But this is the thing. But this process for me, Neil, began before this, actually, before we were forced into this kind of isolation. I think a lot of people were already in a kind of virtual isolation because they actually believed, for example, social media was social, when in fact it's antisocial. It's the very opposite of social. It's the sort of thing that brings out the worst in people and leads to horrible situations being created without anyone ever seeing one another.
Yes, I'm literally only on social media because my agent made me do it so that
That's a terrible excuse.
So that I could publicise, if I have a book that's been published, or if I've got something coming up that I'd like, an audience to know about, or when I was doing my book tours, it's a means to reach out. But I wouldn't do it if I wasn't able to make a sort of a necessity of it, because I've said before, it's like bobbing for apples in an open sewer.
Yeah.
Being on social media, it's just so unpleasant, and I don't really understand why there's so much in the way of anonymous accounts out there. I think a lot of the unpleasantness would be done away with if people had to be on there as themselves.
Yeah.
That you're saying something unpleasant to someone,
Right.
they knew who you were and where you were. I think people would be a bit less inclined to be quite so foul to strangers,
Right.
if they weren't able to hide behind the anonymity. But I wouldn't use it, but for the fact that it's a tool, for me to be able to let people know about certain things that I'm up to. But
Yeah.
I find otherwise the strain that it takes on me, the toll that it would otherwise take on me, I just wouldn't bother.
No, that's right, and I'm the same. I mean, I do it because I have a radio show. If I didn't, quite frankly, I wouldn't bother at all. But an amazing thing happened this week where my son had drawn this painting for his teacher. I don't know if you
saw
saw.
that.
It's had nearly like 900,000 views on Twitter. I mean, I've said to him, you might want to just give up school and just start painting for a living. His mother's not keen. She doesn't want me to exploit him at such a young age.
Yeah, I thought it was. I saw it, and I wouldn't have if it hadn't been captioned the way it was. I would have assumed it had come from a much more experienced.
I know, but I wonder whether
I wouldn't have balked at it.
Right. But it's now been recognised. It's been George Galloway's been on talking about it. It's India Willoughby's been. There's some guy who was in the Reagan White House has retweeted it. I mean, and that is the kind of the benefit, I suppose, of social media, that it has brought this incredible world into your house.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. Goodness me. I mean, the internet, full stop. The internet has been with us, more or less in one form or another since the 50s.
Yeah.
It's been going through iterations and evolutions. The thing we've got now is actually, it's a middle-aged thing now, and it's been of enormous benefit. But as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility, and it has to be. It is kind of out of control in a way that I don't think the visionaries that saw it coming. The people like Vinton Cerf and John Postel and Tim Berners-Lee and Marvin Minsky and Doug Engelbart and all these guys that were there at MIT and Stanford Research Institute and brought it forward. It was supposed to be, and I suppose under certain circumstances it could have been what the MIT's hippies, for want of a better word, wanted it to be, which was this open source, open access, unifying, bringing together communities. It has that potential within it, but of course we are an imperfect species, and those imperfect aspects of our personalities and the way we are have got in amongst the internet, and now it's very much a mix of of good and also pernicious.
Yes, there's there's a kind of race to the bottom that goes on culturally, isn't there? Because all kind of human life is there, and quite a lot of it isn't very pleasant.
Yeah, and I think again, maybe we should have seen it coming. That I think that anonymity and the fact that anyone can access it from anywhere, it is an open door to the best as well as the worst. And that's why I've written recently about I lament the fact that it has replaced for so many people almost every other means of communication. That letter writing has gone, and just even voice calls on the phone. I mean, even making voice calls is anathema. My kids wouldn't contemplate making a voice call to someone. You might as well suggest they use a Ouija board to get in touch with a friend. It's just not going to happen. If it's not by text, it doesn't happen. And I do lament the loss of other means of communication, not because I am a Luddite to some extent, but I think you can have both without losing either.
Yes. Oh, I think you absolutely can. But I mean, there will be people listening to this and watching us who probably will go through the entire day, possibly the week, without speaking to another human.
Do you remember? You will remember when you were like a young reporter at a desk in an office, and there would be that point in the day where you had to make the calls.
Yeah.
You'd been and people. It was quite natural, especially reporters, to put making the call, because you knew that you were going to phone somebody up, a total stranger maybe, and ask them have an uncomfortable conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
And I can remember sitting in news offices, we would sort of wind each other up to do the calls.
Right.
but it's good for you because having to make that person-to-person direct communication without the filter of a screen of any kind,
yeah,
it makes you moderate what you do. It makes you think before you speak,
yeah,
and you don't just say the first thing that comes into your mind. And I think it knocks off some of the rough edges and corners that are there in us as youngsters.
yes.
And it's part of humanizing you and socializing you to actually have a voice call with somebody rather than just pinging an email.
That's very true, because you can do it without thinking, and the same goes for social media. I think that you can sort of abuse somebody. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a great video that was done by somebody in Australia about sort of this is what Facebook's like if it was real life. And this guy does things like just following people down the street and shouts at them, in the way that people would do on social media. And it's very funny, but it's also very effective, because you would never dream of behaving like that in normal circumstances. But all these people behave like crazy people on the internet.
I was walking with my son. We were coming back from something we'd been doing in the town, and a car, turned into the road we were about to cross. And a pedestrian did walk out in front of the car pretty much. Yeah. And the car braked. And the volley of, we couldn't hear a word from inside the car because the windows were closed. Right. But the driver was gesticulating and shouting and bawling. And I said to my son, if he had just been a pedestrian and he had bumped into another pedestrian on a zebra crossing, he wouldn't have done any of that.
No.
He only feels psychologically able to do that because he's inside a metal box.
Yes.
And he's got that distance from that other human being. Otherwise, he would, well, unless he's some sort of psychopath, he would have moderated his behaviour, because you just don't scream at strangers.
No, but this has now invaded every aspect of society. It started with the Brexit argument. It's gone through the independence argument in Scotland. You've suffered at the hands of those who disagree with you. As all of us have been kind of castigated by people who think that we talk radio are somehow dangerous and somehow warning people not to do things, which of course we're not. We've got this ridiculous situation now where nobody is able to discuss anything with any degree of intellectual capacity.
No, it almost feels sometimes as though, like through lockdown, and it would be a good example, that you can feel backed into just only having a certain amount of sanctioned answers that you're allowed to give to questions. You feel as if there's a script that with every new situation that comes along, be it racism or the transgender debate, there very quickly seems to assemble a set of answers that it's appropriate to give. And as long as you give one of those answers, then you won't get into trouble. I sometimes feel like with every issue that comes around, we could all just get a laminated card made up, with the available. And when you asked a question, you could just point. Yes. Like in the old days in a Chinese restaurant, where you just say the number because you couldn't say the name of it. You just point to that answer. Right. That's my answer to that question, because if you take that, I wouldn't get into trouble. Right. And so it takes the honesty out of conversations, because someone learning not to say something doesn't mean that they've stopped thinking it. They just learn not to say it, but they still think it. Yeah. But for self-preservation, they learn to say something else. So at no point necessarily, unless you know somebody very, very well, can you be as confident as perhaps we once were able to be that you're actually hearing what someone genuinely thinks. Yeah. Because self-preservation in this world of cancel culture means that people just think, well, there's that question. I know the safe answer to that. I'll just give it. But you've got no way of knowing if they actually mean it. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a conversation with somebody some time ago who said, I really love your show, Mike, but I can't admit it to my friends. I'm like, what? I was kind of gobsmacked by that. I was like, because people have a view an awful lot of the time of something which is wrong, and they just believe the view without actually checking it out.
I have had I had a long conversation yesterday with someone, and I've had numerous conversations of the sort over the last year. The number of people that say to me, I absolutely think what you say, but I won't say it. I can't say it. Because because they're employed or they're within corporate bodies and whatever that would monitor what their employees and do monitor what employees say in public. So the extent to which people are being divorced from their true opinions by fear, and are just learning to say the things that they think are acceptable and that won't cause them any trouble. we're not having real conversations, or we might not be having conversations anymore. I mean, I say what I think.
Yeah.
Within reason. Obviously, there are certain things that I keep private, but what I'm saying to you now is what I think. But so many people come up to me in the street and say, I think that as well, but and they're almost worried about
Absolutely. Listen, Neil, great to talk to you. We're out of time again. We both say what we think. Sometimes people don't get it. Hopefully, most of the time they do. That's why we're the fastest growing radio station on the planet, because we tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This is Talk Radio.